Welcome to my cake kitchen. In this video, I'm taking you through how I decorated this beautiful simple birthday cake for a client during a UK heat wave. Now listen, the finished cake looks polished, elegant, and beautifully put together, and I'm genuinely proud of how it turned out. But boy oh boy, this cake did not come easy, because if you've been here for a while, you would have known that this cake started fighting me from the very beginning. Because first of all, the layers that I first baked to put together for this cake overbaked right from the start, and I had to rebake the next batch, which sank. Then the buttercream fell apart, which I had to fix, and the ganache consistency was adjusted slightly, which became a problem in the decorating process, which you will see. Filling and the stacking process, I had to adapt slightly for the weather, and honestly, the entire decorating process felt like I was in survival mode. Every single stage, from stacking to crumb coating right up to smoothing the cake, became a challenge because of the heat wave conditions. And so when I say heat wave in the UK, remember we're talking 26 to 30 degrees C, which in British homes and in my kitchen basically feels like I'm baking alongside the cake. So all I'll say is this: cake decorating during heat wave will test you. It takes skill, patience, confidence, problem solving, and honestly a lot of prayer if you believe in that, because some of the problems happening during this process were completely out of my control, and I needed my prayer to keep me zen. On this channel, I don't just show the polished look, because I take you through the process just to empower you and to show you even expert cake decorating processes can take an unexpected turn. So I show you the chaos. So if you've watched some of the live, you would have already seen the struggles that started in real time when the crisis started and was at its peak. And if you've missed those, please go back and check them out, and I will leave some links in the description box for you, or I'll link some of the videos at the end. But in this video, we're starting from having chilled the cake after filling and stacking, which I have as a video already, and we're going to be taking it from trimming, crumb coating, smoothing, and completely decorating this cake. So grab a drink, get comfortable, and join me as I jump right into this chaos. A quick note of caution here: the calm you see with the clean table and neatly chilled cake is about to disappear very quickly to be replaced with chaos, and I can't prepare you for that. For now though, let's enjoy this peaceful moment whilst I trim the cake before crumb coating. Now, trimming here is not just for aesthetics or creating a smooth, even surface, which is what I discussed in previous videos. In a heat wave, trimming is really an important part of stabilizing this cake, especially because I'm covering it with ganache. You'll notice I'm carefully trimming away the thin outer layer of buttercream already sitting around the crust of the cake. The reason for doing this is really important. If I leave the buttercream underneath the cake as is, then I later apply ganache over it, especially during this warm weather, the buttercream can eventually break through at room temperature, which will cause cracking and instability issues. And in a heat wave, those little problems become bigger problems very quickly. So whilst I've talked in previous videos about the different reasons for trimming cake, the main purpose here is stability and creating the best possible surface for the ganache to adhere to the cake. Another important tip if you're doing this during the warm weather seasons is to make sure the buttercream is fully set before trimming, and I mean properly chilled and stable. Now, I can't give you an exact timing for that because every environment is different, every fridge setting is different, and every heat wave seems determined to personally attack bakers depending on their confidence and circumstance. But in this warm weather I'm working with, chilling becomes incredibly important because of the handling, friction, and the movement involved in trimming a cake. Because if the cake isn't properly set, it will shift and slide and completely lose structure whilst I'm working on it, and I don't have time for that stress. Now, another trick that really helps when trimming a cake is to use a sharp knife dipped in hot water. The mug beside me, looking like I'm about to have a cup of tea in this hot weather, is not for tea but filled with hot water. The knife's blade is then put into this hot water so it can glide smoothly around the cake. Notice here though that I am not cutting chunks out of the cake. I am carefully trimming only thin crusts around the sides to create a cleaner surface. The cake board underneath on which the cake is stacked acts as my guide, so I know exactly how much to remove without over trimming the cake. Now, if some of these techniques seem difficult for you to see fully here, don't worry. Check back in the live tutorials where I cover this process in detail. But in summary, the details of what you need is on screen for you, and a combination of all of this will make trimming your cakes in warm weather much easier for you. The cake has now been trimmed and left to chill before coming back to be crumb coated. Full disclosure here, the ganache you see me using at this stage is actually not the fresh batch of ganache I specifically made for this cake. This is leftover ganache from a different kind of cake that I decided to use for the crumb coat because I was already experiencing consistency issues with the fresh batch of ganache I had prepared for this project. A video for how I made that ganache with slight adaptations for this cake is part of the live session where my buttercream fell apart and the cake overbaked. I'll leave a link in the description box or at the end of the video for you. Now let's talk crumb coating. The purpose of a crumb coat is to seal in all the loose crumbs so they don't show through the final finish. It's one of the key steps in achieving a polished, professional looking cake. Normally you'll apply such a thin layer of ganache, just enough to trap in the crumbs, chill the cake, and then come back and apply your layers before the final coat. Except in a heat wave, I have to make adaptations. So you'll notice instead of applying an ultra thin layer of ganache coating, I have added a little more than usual, and that's intentional, partly because I need to seal in the crumbs, but also consider building the cake from this point on so that I can work efficiently to reduce the amount of time the cake is returned in parts for the final coat. The less time I spend handling the cake in this heat, better my results with ganache will be. So I add in as much ganache as I can and scrape away any excess using my scraper. Also at this stage, perfection is not the goal. The goal is simply to get the cake sealed and reasonably smooth. And if you look closely, you will notice the imperfections. There are exposed areas, air pockets, and uneven sections, but that is completely fine. The crumb coat is not supposed to be beautiful, but it's supposed to be functional, and all the little imperfections will be corrected later as we continue to build up to the finish, because a clean, elegant looking cake doesn't happen by accident. It takes intention, patience, and corrective work along the way. Now once the crumb coat is applied, you'll notice the lip of the cake forming at the edge on the top there. I'm not too worried about that right now, as I'll chill the cake and trim it later when it comes back. For now though, the crumb coat has done its job, and the next step is to leave the cake in the fridge, and there are more tips on screen to help you out. The cake is back now for its first full coat of ganache, and I'm going to tell you right now, you're about to see how humbling ganache problems can be even for an accomplished cake maker. But before I do, watch closely as the ganache goes over the cake and notice how glossy it looks, sliding all over the cake and doesn't seem to stay in one place as I struggle to keep it on the cake. That's the first clue. There's something not quite right with the ganache, and the problem is entirely my fault, and here's why. Before using the ganache, I warmed it in the microwave to break it up a bit, and somehow between slightly softened and ready to use, which is what I was aiming for, I got slightly carried away and overheated the ganache, which caused it to split. The result is a ganache that has become far too softer than it should have been. That's why you're seeing the glossy texture here, which isn't great for covering cakes any day, and even worse on a challenging day like this one. Another issue related to the gloss looking ganache is connected to the ratio of chocolate to cream, which is approximately 4.5 to 1 chocolate to cream, which is what I used. I mentioned earlier about adapting the ratio of ganache just to be able to optimize it for using on a warm weather day, but the ratio here can really be tricky to get right, because normally when covering cakes, particularly in warm weather, the recommended ratio is 3.5 to 1 or worse 4 to 1. I've covered the subject of ganache ratios in great detail in other videos that I will link for you, so catch up on there. But the point is 4.1 is a little too much, and though I was aiming for a firmer hold of the cake, it is giving me texture issues which I am struggling to kind of get a hold of. I have also covered the subject of how I make and use my ganache from start to finish, so the subject here is not actually the ganache recipe, but the adaptations that I made, and of course the little problem of overheating the ganache just before I used it. At this stage, the strongest recommendation is simple: to stop everything and to leave the ganache alone, put it in the fridge or even at room temperature. At cooler temperatures it will set, and then I'll come back and reuse it. But I'm already working at 1 a.m. because I had to adjust my timings for when it was cooler, and the customer is picking up the cake in the morning, so I am rushing against time to get this cake done, which means as the problems are developing, I'm finding myself in a really tricky spot to correct these issues on time to get this cake right.